If you are a HKUST student and you would like to claim the PDEV or PDC hours, yeah, grateful if you can change your name to your full name so that we can more easily recognize your participation in our Zoom session, okay? Yeah, so change your name to your full name in the participants list. Let me check the time. Yeah, so it's 4 o'clock already. So let's get started. Welcome everyone to HKUST's Research Data Management Symposium 2021. So this is Jennifer from the library. So today we finally came to our last event. And then the title is on how to manage data. So data stewardship and fire skills. So today, we are very fortunate to have invited 2 external guest speakers. So Marta Teperek from TU Delft Library and also Professor Laurent Gatto from UC Louvain with us. Okay, so in our first part of the seminar, we are going to have a joint presentation with the title, Becoming a Better Scientist with Open and Reproducible Research and Supporting the Scientists on this Journey. Following the seminar, we are going to have following the presentation, we are going to have a panel discussion led by Professor King Chao of HKUST. So before we have the panel discussion, may I invite everyone just to keep your audio muted. And also if you have any questions, feel free just to put your question down to the chat box and we will look at them. Okay, I would also like to take a few minutes to introduce our speakers. So Dr. Marta Teperek is the head of research data services at TU Delft Library based in the Netherlands. So Dr. Marta Teperek is also the director of 40U research data since June 2020. And between 2017 and 2020, Marta was the data stewardship coordinator at TU Delft. And she was building a team of expert disciplinary data stewards, providing research data services to the researchers. Our second speaker, Professor Laurent Gatto, is an associate professor in bioinformatics from UC Louvain, the Juve Institute. So his research team was focusing on the application and development of statistical learning for the large-scale analysis and comprehension of biological data. So alongside the scientist part, Professor Laurent actually is an avid advocate for open research, trying to make his research output as open as possible. And lastly, we have our very own faculty member, Professor King Chao. So King is a professor in life science and also in biomedical engineering. And he is also currently the acting Dean of Students at HKUST. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic and also the screen to Professor Chao to start the session today. So I'm going to stop share. Thank you.
All right, okay, so thanks everybody for joining today's section. I hope that today's section will be something relevant to your own research work. As a research scientist, but we know that in the past few years, actually there's a lot of debate about research, how reproducible they are, and a lot of retractions because of irreproducible results gathered. I think that has been issues around. But also as a researcher, we all constantly know that we can read papers. And we find that actually you see people report on certain findings, but then when you really try to do it in your own lab or in your own research work, you'll find that it's not possible. In fact, I can share with you an experience that I was talking to a Nobel Prize winner in the past and published work on some finding, which is warrant a Nobel Prize. But then when I asked for the detail, they don't have a record anymore. And the person left and no more information. So read the paper. And so that's the recommendation. So for that, I think that we need to really have some good tracking so that actually we can have all this data being archived in the institution to make it available to practitioners in the field. And so today it's good that we have Laurent and Marta to be here to talk about how to do good research, reproducible research, as well as in an open setting, so that we can share information that whatever you do today, it will be beneficial for all the followers to follow up on your own work. So with that, I hope that it set the tone. And so I will pass the platform to Marta and Laurent, and they are going to come in as a team, jumping back and forth, talking about various issues. So Laurent and Marta, up to you.
Thank you very much for this introduction, and very on point with your anecdote with the Nobel Prize winner, because that's exactly the message that we would like to share. So could you confirm that you can see my slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So we have actually two-part title for this joint presentation. The first title is Becoming a Better Scientist, Open and Reproducible Research, and Supporting the Scientists on this journey. And another way of seeing this is to highlight the importance of collaboration between the researchers and the support staff to be able to produce sustainable research and open and reproducible research practices. And so there are a couple of links here if you want to follow the slides or read a little bit more about what we have done to prepare for the seminar. So you have a link to the slides that I'm presenting right now. We also have written up everything we wanted to say. So there is a blog post when you can read all the material. And during the presentation, we'll have a couple of questions for the audience. So that's the link there, but I will be showing it later on once we get to the actual questions. And so why do we have a joint seminar? Well, we are convinced that it's essential to have collaboration between the researchers and the staff that is there to help them and make sure that they have a successful implementation of their research, and they're able to share it as widely as possible. And we thought that doing this joint talk would be a great opportunity to concretely show examples on my side how I do my very best to be an open and reproducible researcher, but also to appeal to the staff that provides this essential support. Marta?
Thanks so much, Laurent, for this introduction. And also, on top of the goals of our presentations and how we wanted to do it together, I also wanted to give you a little bit of a personal story, why do we know each other, why we thought it would be nice to do this presentation together. And actually, our paths crossed, mine and Laurent's, already in 2010 at the University of Cambridge. And we reflected together in preparation of this seminar that we know each other and work together already for over 10 years, over a decade. And now we are meeting virtually in Hong Kong. Thank you for the invitation. But it all started, I was doing my PhD at the Gurdon Institute, so developmental biology, epigenetics, collecting lots of data. And this was in the building on the left-hand side that you can see on the picture. At the same time, Laurent was doing his postdoc at the biochemistry department. And what I found interesting, these buildings were literally next door. There was actually even a door between those buildings, a corridor that you could cross if you want. We did similar kinds of research. I needed some bioinformatics that Laurent was doing, but actually we never worked together, as it happened. And what brought us together, what started our really intense collaboration, was a Data Champions initiative. If we can move to the next slide. We actually started collaborating in 2016. And indeed, the Data Champions initiative, which was launched by the University of Cambridge, what was really started our deep collaboration and friendship, I would say. Laurent became a data champion, one of our leading researchers who were talking about good practices that you can implement in your research, and you will hear about them later on in the slides. And meantime, I, after my PhD, have joined the University Library at Cambridge to establish research data support services. So in this context, we really started working together. And hope we can inspire you. What can we do together if we collaborate between researchers and support staff? If we can move to the next slide. I just wanted to tell you what kind of topics we would like to discuss with you today. This will be an informal conversation, so hopefully, you know, with these kind of topics we will introduce during the presentation, we can then go further into an open discussion at the end of today's webinar. First of all, Laurent will like to discuss some definitions about what do we mean by open, reproducible, and good science. Then we would both like to talk about the importance of people support that are around you. We also want to talk about the practice and policies. I think the important topics, some of them perhaps a bit controversial, not perceived as useful, but would like to talk with you about this. We also wanted to mention the importance of collaboration on training, the initiatives we've been changing the recognition and reward systems in academia. And finally, would like to finish with stressing the importance of your community, of people around you and working together with them. With that, I think I will be indeed giving over to you.
Thank you. But so before giving you one view of open reproducible research, I would like to ask the audience a couple of questions. So if you could all either scan that QR code or navigate to the URL here on the right-hand side. So 3xw.woocolab.com/ and then in capitals NAXHAK. And that's where I'll be showing a couple of questions to you. And so here's the first one. Do you practice open and reproducible research? And as you can see, you can reply yes, no, or you can also say that you are actually not quite sure and you're waiting for some definitions of these different terms. So I see we have just over 40 people that are connected to WooClap. We have 29 answers so far. And the majority is not quite sure, seems to be not yet quite sure whether they are practicing open and reproducible research. And I think that's actually a healthy reply, because as I'll mentioned in very soon, you know, it's not always clear what open reproducible research is supposed to be. And so I suggest maybe we could move to the second question, where we ask you to provide a couple of keywords that for you represent open, reproducible research, as well as data management. So when you hear these terms, what does it mean to you? Now, interesting, chores, sharing, transparent, cooperative. So accessibility, you know, sharing is apparently really important. Codes, privacy, results, visibility, very good, yes. So sharing seems to be the word that comes back multiple times. Code, open access. Oh, interesting, there is also fake that comes up. Git, so some technical terms, fair principles, yes. Better impact, carrots and sticks, that's very interesting, and I think we'll get back to that a little bit later. Okay, so I think we have over 70 people that have replied, and the overall topics that come out are sharing, free, code, collaboration, and accessible. Excellent. So let me switch back to my presentation. And I'll give you definitions, some definitions of these terms. So let's start with open science. Open research is the process of transparent dissemination and access to knowledge. And it can be applied to various scientific topics: open data, open source, open access. We have seen open access in the word cloud before. We have talked about code, open source. But I think we need to be really careful here, because open science, open research can mean different things to different people, and should not become a stamp collection activity, right? It's not like, oh, I practice open research in many aspects, and that's why I am more open or less closed than somebody else, right? If we start thinking about open research like that, then we start to exclude people, and not everybody is able to, be an open scientist or apply these open research principles as freely as they would like, right? So it's not open or closed. It's most certainly kind of a continuous aspect. There is a continuum, a gradient between not being open at all and being open as much as possible, as much as we can. And the same thing about reproducible research. There exists several levels, several layers of increased difficulty that describe the action of reusing external data, external software, material, information, knowledge, to attempt to observe the same or comparable results as others have done. And so formally, we talk of repeating, reproducing, replicating, or reusing things depending on these different levels of complexity. And again, these are often very difficult to achieve, as we have seen an example during the introduction, right? So none of these are binary. It's not open, close. It's not reproducible, not reproducible. There is a continuum, a gradient that leads to greater reproduction, to greater openness. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind whenever we think or we want to apply these principles. And very important, open and reproducible are different things. Wherever we are on that scale, open is not the same as reproducible, even though in our modern view, these two are linked, but these are different things. I can be open and not reproducible. I can be reproducible and I could remain closed, right? And none of these are a guarantee for good science, whatever the definition of good science is. That's another debate. But these two things are not equal to good science. However, open and reproducible research relies, on a good data management principle. That is extremely important. If you don't manage your data well, there is no way you will be able to produce open science or produce reproducible research. But then again, as I said, open and reproducible research are not necessarily good research. They are supported by good data. However, what open and reproducible research allows you to do is to provide trust, right? These two lead to trust, to verification, and to guarantees. Trust in reporting. Are my results accurately reported? Trust in an implementation. Is the analysis code successfully implementing the method that I chose to use? Statistical trust. Can the data and methods, are they appropriate, or are they still appropriate? Because these, of course, evolve. And then finally, scientific trust. Are the results, or do the results convincingly support the claims about the underlying systems of truth that we study, right? And so all these are hallmarks of good science. But the only way to reach these goals, these very noble goals, is to make sure that we are able to manage our data successfully. So that was a little introduction to see a little bit what we are talking about. So let's move to the second topic, which is people support. So for me, working openly and reproducibly is absolutely paramount for my own benefit, but also for the benefit of my collaborators and my students. And so for me, it was very natural when I started my own research group to center the lab's activities around the principles of good data management to enable open and reproducible research. And this is reflected here in my lab's statement, where open science and reproducible research are really at the center of everything we do. We are committed to open, transparent, and rigorous practice, scientific inquiry, and we make all the efforts possible. And sometimes these are efforts, it's not always straightforward, to make sure that others can reproduce our results, access our data, and access all the code that we have written. And that's why we consider software, code, and data to be essential deliverables of everything we do. It's not only about papers, but all the other outputs are just as important to us as the papers. So that's a fundamental kind of statement of the lab, and that's how we try to work. Marta?
Thanks, Laurent, for the introduction. I also wanted to reflect on this a little bit from the institutional perspective, and reflecting what Laurent mentioned, and especially about the difficulty with sometimes understanding what open, what reproducible practices mean. I just wanted to think together with you about the different tasks that researchers are expected to do and are expected to excel at, Of course, doing research, some of you perhaps are doing teaching, supervising, perhaps other students or other members of your research groups. Some of you, especially perhaps more senior of you, will be also asked to get funding. The more grants you have, the better researchers you have. Of course, reading, writing papers, publishing papers, that whole, how many papers you get, what's the impact factor and so on. That's a lot of pressures on researchers, also reading the papers, keeping up to date with literature, going to conferences, probably many more, and each one of you would have a slightly different list. But if on top of that we add managing code and data, we can start to question, can one person, can all of us be all these heroes that can be excellent at all these different aspects of doing good research, as Laurent has said. So for that, I strongly believe we need some support, and we need to team up with professionals, with people who can help us with those kind of expertise. I think, and speaking with many researchers like Laurent, but also other researchers from Cambridge, from TU Delft, where I currently work, it seems like that good data management takes a lot of time, a lot of effort, but also requires certain knowledge and skills that not all researchers will have to have. Maybe they didn't have the right training, maybe their peers don't have this kind of skills to share with them. So in my strong feeling, researchers should not be doing this alone. We have to really work in partnership, in collaboration with support staff who can help you on this journey. You shouldn't be seeing this as a challenge that you have to address on your own. And I also wanted to give you a couple of examples of what we do at TU Delft to support our researchers, our PhD students in these efforts. If we can move to the next slide. The first one, as Jennifer has introduced me, I was supervising beforehand a team of data stewards. These were mostly people who had either a PhD as their background, or some of them even postdoctoral education. But most importantly, data stewards were colleagues who had disciplinary background, similar to the researchers that they were supporting. They are appointed at each faculty. So at TU Delft, for example, we have our research area is split into 8 different faculties. They have slightly different flavors, slightly different types of research that is being done in each one of them. And each one of them has appointed a data steward. That's a dedicated person who is the trusted first contact person for any data questions. So if researchers are not sure, where do I start? What should I be doing? What are the tools that I can use? Go to your data stewards. These are the people who will help you to sometimes penetrate the very difficult to find, resources that each university has. I don't know how it is at Hong Kong. Perhaps you are much better organized, but in Delft, no matter how well we try to organize our website or support, people really struggle to find things. So instead of trying to, do this difficulty of trying to find the right person, just go to them. They will connect you to the right person, even if they don't know. We see them some kind of general practitioner doctors, You come to them, they should be able to help you with 80% of your questions, of your request for support. And for the remaining 20%, they will send you to the specialist, to another person who will know what to do. And some principles that we have with that, first of all, these are the people who do a lot of advocacy. They help with training. but they always want to see research as central. So we don't come to researchers with a stick, as police, that's what you should be doing. You are not open enough or reproducible enough, but what kind of steps you can take if you are, of course, interested to work with us to make your research a little bit better. And in addition to that, recently we also have started additional support of the Digital Competence Center. And the reason for this was that Data Stewards became rather popular with our researchers. So a lot of researchers wanted to work with them. And Data Stewards have realized that just being the contact person is not good enough. We can, of course, advise you, please use this tool, but some researchers wanted to know, please show me, please work with me. How do I implement this tool in practice? How do I get started with, for example, electronic lab notebooks? Or how do I create a database for my data? Or how do I make my software reproducible? And of course, just having one person for the entire faculty wasn't sufficient to provide this hands-on support. So what we have started a year ago, we are now piloting a Digital Competence Center support team, and we call it digital because it's also important to recognize that we can't really think about reproducible research if we don't think about all the research outputs and workflows. So data on par with software, they are both very important. We have employed a virtual team of people, which now consists of 4 research software engineers, 2 data managers, 1 colleague which has a specialism in high performance computing, and 1 coordinator. And what happens is that researchers can write a short application. We try to make it as lightweight as possible to explain why would they like to get support of these people, why would they like to learn better practices in terms of reproducibility of their research, fairness of their research. And when they submit this application, they can receive support of a data manager, software engineer, HPC specialist, depending on what their needs are, who will join the research groups for up to 2 days per week for up to 6 months to really work together, co-create those reproducible workflows, and basically implement that advice into practice. So that's one of the things that we do. And on the next slide, I just wanted to tell you that you should probably also get in touch with the colleagues that you have, at your own resources and at your own university. So as you can see, Jennifer, Gabi, Kevin today have organized this seminar for you, and they have got lots of other skills that, if you haven't yet spoken with them one-to-one or haven't asked for their support, that might be a good idea to reach out to them and see what's available for you. So my message to you is first, look out for what kind of support we have available around you. And on my next slide, I also wanted to tell with you, some of you might say, that's not only people support that matters, we also need infrastructure, we also need the tools. Of course, I think we all need the tools, we need good working infrastructure, otherwise we can't really be reproducible. At TU Delft, for example, since 2010, we have 40U research data, which is a trusted data and software repository for any researchers who wanted to deposit data within science, engineering, and design. Any researcher in the world can use it, upload the data, reuse the data. We have about 30% usage internationally. But what's most important, as with any infrastructure, you can have a best infrastructure in the world. But if we go to my next slide, I think the key behind those infrastructure is really people who make a difference. And in our 40U research data, we again have a team of data curators. So whenever researchers would like to upload data or share their code, they're approached by a team of people who can support them with the process. So here, for example, is a message on Twitter from one of the researchers who shared their data with 40U research data. And again, complementing the people working behind the scenes of 40U research data, behind the infrastructure, who really help the researcher with that process if they don't know what is metadata or which data I should share. And again, on my next slide, for those of you who might not yet know, I wanted to make a reference to the data space at Hong Kong University. Again, you have a beautiful resource in there. So please, if you don't know about it yet, make use. And again, you have wonderful colleagues who could help you and guide you through that resource. And with that, I think we could try to discuss the practice and policy. Laurent.
Indeed, and we have another question for you. So here it is. Does your institution have policies in place on data management? So we have 80 people that are connected to WooClap, and out of 25, we are currently even between yes and don't know. And again, as you have seen from Marta, there is a rich diversity of different types of support and different types of policies that could be implemented. So not knowing isn't that surprising. Okay, so we seem to have reached a stable split between mostly yeses and don't know. So we can move back to the presentation. And I wanted to give you an example of my practice of open and reproducible research. So on this screen, you see kind of 3 levels, 3 stages of how one can do, or how I implemented this open and reproducible research principle in a research project. And so on the left-hand side here, what you see is the GitHub repository. Technical terms aren't really important. It's a place where I share a reproducible document. That's a document that not only gives the text of the final paper, but also all the code and how I did that very specific piece of research. And that reproducible document uses open source software. And it also uses curated data, hence the importance of good data management. There wouldn't be any of that research that would have been ever produced if before that, years before writing that paper, we hadn't curated data and managed that data, some of our own data produced in the lab, but also some of the data produced by others. So the next stage, after working on that research and producing that reproducible document, once we are happy with our research, we want to share it as quickly and efficiently as possible. And I think there is nothing that beats a preprint to immediately share the research with the community and try to gather up some feedback. And eventually later, and sometimes much later, there is a final paper, peer-reviewed paper that is published in a journal. And so when you see this, hopefully this is a way of working that is appealing to you, but probably you will wonder, but does it not take more time to work like that? And for me, the answer is no. It's more a matter of relocating time, right? Instead of spending a lot of time towards the end of your project where you want to redo some analysis based on some input through peer review or when giving talks or community in general, that time is invested at the very beginning of your project, when working reproducibly, when managing your data, when already opening up part of your research, even before the paper is published. By the time your reproducible document is finished, or by the time you publish your paper. And so that time is invested at the very beginning, so that in the end, in my opinion at least, it doesn't take more time if you want to work like that. So from a personal experience, I can't really say that policies aren't really the main motivation when practicing good data management. In my opinion, it's important that data management is an intrinsic motivation, right? Which I think shouldn't be difficult to trigger by the desire of producing trusted research. Right? Local action at a specific lab or at the initiative from one or a couple of motivated researchers, especially early career researchers, is possible and actually quite easy and very efficient. However, I think it's extremely difficult to try to expand that intrinsic motivation outside of one's direct environment. And I think for this, policies are actually quite important.
Thank you for this introduction, Laurent. I really appreciate this, and especially this reflection on policies. Indeed, I completely agree with Laurent that policies which are disconnected from practice, and indeed your intrinsic motivation, can turn into box-ticking exercises. So we really should not be looking at policies like that. And if we go to the next slide, indeed, let's forget about this. You know, if we want to introduce a policy just for the sake of policy, it doesn't work. I think at Cambridge, where we both worked with Laurent, we had an example. One of the research funders at some point introduced a policy with no support for this policy. The policy was basically saying that if you are funded by this particular funder, for all your papers, the data has to be made available. What they did afterwards, they did some spot checking. They would phone up researchers randomly and ask them, where is your data? When researchers realized that this is happening, that somebody is following through, they would share their data. But if you would see this data, some of that were really not very valuable. Some people would share a PDF of the paper and pretend that was data. Of course, it's very difficult for us to, to suddenly teach the good practices to everybody. So what I'm just saying is that very important, if you want to introduce a policy, that it's aligned with the practices, that goes hand in hand, that's done together with the community, following consultation with the community, training and support are offered. And to us, we actually wrote a paper sharing TU Delft experience with policy development. But what I wanted to say that developing our policy on research data, I will give you a couple of examples what's in that policy. That was really a joint effort together with our research community. We had several working groups, and it took at least 3 years from the moment, when we've realized a policy would have been useful to the time when we have finished with our consultations, talking with researchers, that everybody thought this is the right moment to have a policy. And if we go to the next slide, I can give you a couple of case studies why a policy was important. During these consultations with researchers, like one of the PhD student supervisor was reflecting that when PhD students leave, they usually write up papers because that's the currency, that's what's important, but nobody cares about research data, so it's not archived. So what if somebody, that professor was worried, what if somebody would ask questions about the reproducibility of their data written in that paper? And again, what King told us at the very beginning, if they are not there, the data is not there, nobody can answer any questions about reproducibility. So what's going on? The professor was really interested in changing this thing, like let's make sure that PhD candidates, PhD students deposit their data. On the other hand, in lots of consultations with PhD students, actually, many of them said, I hope that you don't experience this at your university, but at TU Delft, at least, many of them said that they would actually love to spend more time on managing their data and code. They see the importance, but their supervisor thinks it's a waste of time and they should be spending all their time writing more papers. So there was this conflict, in a way, everybody recognized that it would be good to share the data better, manage it better, but because there was no recognition of what we should be doing with that, that was nobody's priority. So in the end, if we go to the next slide, in our framework policy, we have introduced a couple of requirements, again, with endorsement and consultation with the community to address these specific aspects. Other aspects are addressed as well, but I just wanted to give you this one example pertaining to PhD students and data sharing. First of all, PhD students have to write a data management plan, which is part of their go, no go. At TU Delft, after first year, there is some sort of examination where there is an evaluation whether the PhD should continue or whether a student should leave with a master's degree. So as part of that, PhD students are asked to write a data management plan and submit it for evaluation. Another requirement that's going to kick in for PhD students who started in January this year, so graduating in 3 years' time at the earliest, they will have to upload their data into a data repository before they leave, before they graduate. So there are, of course, some valid exceptions to that. And what is very important to also activate this communication between supervisors and PhD students, the supervisors are responsible for approving both. First of all, because they might understand some exceptions, but secondly, That's also a way for initiating the dialogue about data between PhD students and supervisors. And here I just wanted to share with you some reflections from the data stewards that we have and from PhD students. So PhD supervisors are now coming to the data stewards because they want to learn more about data management, because students are asking questions about data management plan and they want to know more in order to provide good feedback to their students. In fact, just a couple of days ago, so after we have written the slides with Laurent, we were approached by the graduate school who told us the same. PhD supervisors would like to have some checklist and training available to them to guide them through the process, which I think is a good reflection on the change that supervisors are now becoming more interested in data management. And there is a typo. I can see that PhD students who receive training on, because of course, as I mentioned before, you can't just introduce policy. That's important that people have access to support and training. PhD students are reflecting on the importance of data management plans. Since they never knew about this before, they can now save a lot of time if they prepare it at the very beginning. So we see already some tangible benefits. Another short example I wanted to give you is on the next slide. Our work, again, at least 3 years long for development of a research software policy. We had one of our researchers, Anton Akhmerov, who is also one of our data champions, struggled a lot with our TU Delft policies on copyright. By default, in all Dutch universities, the university owns copyright. That means that if you would follow that policy word by word, that would mean that the university owns copyright on any code, any software that the researcher writes. Of course, whether this policy was implemented in practice, that's a different question, but he was concerned, he was very much interested in open practices, that if he was to follow TU Delft regulations by law, for every Git pull request, he was working with GitHub, and whenever you want to make some changes to your code, you make a pull request, he would have to file an invention disclosure form for our valorization center, who would have to estimate whether there is some commercial value in this code and whether it should be commercialized or made available open source. So it wasn't efficient for researchers, it wasn't efficient for staff. We have been working as part of working group, team of researchers and support staff for a couple of years, several years, 3 years. And if we can go to the next slide. We have published recently this year TU Delft Research Software Policy. And what it does, I think it's quite important. It says that if researcher wants to publish their software openly, TU Delft transfers all the copyright to the researchers and researchers can apply open licenses. So it promotes reproducible and open sharing practices if researchers want it. And why I'm sharing this, I think it's a demonstration of a proactive stance of researchers in developing policies, which in the end are useful for them because they remove these barriers that they were in place beforehand. I think that's it about policies. I hopefully gave you some examples about that collaboration.
Thank you very much. Very inspiring, Marta. Lots of ideas for my own university. So we move now on to the training section, and there is another question for everybody. Have you had any dedicated training on data management and reproducible research at your university? Yes, no, you don't remember, or maybe you got yourself trained in these. So it looks like we have an even yes, no, with just over 25% that are self-taught. Yeah, it seemed to stabilize around 36 answers so far. And I think that's an interesting result because it shows that it demonstrates that there is dedicated training in data management, open, reproducible research. Let's keep it diverse here. There definitely is, but not everybody has access to it or doesn't know that it's available. And self-teaching, learning by yourself is still an important channel to learn these skills. So let's carry on with the presentation. And I wanted to briefly share with you my experience or my path with the learning and teaching of these tools, data management, and how to improve my open and reproducible research skills. And so I started, and I didn't put the date there because I don't remember when I became a carpentry software and data carpentry instructor, but it was quite a few years ago, maybe as a postdoc or as a senior research associate in Cambridge. Even though I was already kind of practicing open reproducible research, it's only there where really I appreciated the importance of transmitting these skills and how to do it efficiently. I have then taught these workshops mostly for graduate students and early career researchers. And since I moved to my current institution, I have been reusing and incorporating these teaching materials and the experience in my university teaching. And when I say here university teaching, I focus mainly on bachelor and master's courses to biomedical students. And this has been very rewarding for me. It has been a great benefit, and we'll be talking about benefits of open reproducible research later on, but it has been a great benefit that teaching data management and in general, that the tools that you need for open and reproducible research, even though I don't explicitly say that I teach open and reproducible research and data management, but kind of the underlying skills for these is a great benefit when running a lab, because the students that eventually come into my group to do master's theses and later on PhD students have already these skills, and that makes them makes it very efficient for them to embark in their research. Marta.
Thank you so much, Laurent, for sharing your inspiring story, indeed, how to teach the carpentries and how to embed it within your own research environment. Again, to reflect on, let's say, the institutional perspective on that, at TU Delft, we did a consultation on what kind of training researchers would want to have, what kind of skills they would like to learn. And all the feedback that we have received, we have turned into a vision for data management and software management training. This has been developed in 2019, and this picture that I'm showing you here is a status update on this training. And unfortunately, as you can see, we are nowhere there where we would like to be. As of 2019, we still have a lot of gaps. We only managed to deliver at sufficient capacity very introductory courses. But with the others, we are still delivering the courses regularly. Some of them still needs to be developed. But basically, our problem is capacity, as you can imagine. So there is big demand for courses, and especially if you develop good courses, there is more people who would like to take part in those courses. The demand increases, and our capacity so far hasn't been proportionally growing. So that's something that we have to work on. But just to tell you that, again, by working together with the community, we were able to understand what are the needs, and at least we have a vision. And regularly, I'm talking with my management team, with the university, people responsible for education. How do we make sure that step by step, gradually, we can turn more of these red and orange patches into green? At the beginning, we started, everything was red. So I think at least we made some progress, and we are moving towards that vision. And of course, that's a moving target, because as I mentioned, we started with thinking about training for researchers, for PhD students, now also for master's and bachelor students, but also there are some requirements for training for supervisors. So that vision is constantly updated. But reflecting a little bit more on what Laurent said about the importance of collaborating with researchers on delivering training, I would like to go to the next slide. And we are also doing a lot of carpentry training, as Laurent has said. Carpentry is, by the way, for those of you who are interested, that's a global organization. So actually any of you today in this room could follow this training. Any of you could become an instructor. It's free. Institutions can join as members and they get some benefits. For example, TU Delft is a member of the Carpentries organization. But any of you as a researcher can join it as free of charge to be part of the global community that can teach others hands-on skills on how to do more reproducible research. here I wanted to say how important that collaboration is, especially when you talk about some disciplinary workflows, how to work with data reproducibly. For example, at Delft, we wanted to run a couple of genomic data carpentry courses. This is teaching researchers how to work reproducibly with genomic data. But for that, we can't be doing this only as support staff. We need to have specialists, researchers, for example, like Laurent is for his research institute. We need to have some specialists like that at TU Delft. And thankfully, we had some researchers, our data champions, Victor and Raoul, who were very happy to partner with us at the library. They became these experts who actually also were carpentry instructors. And we did this workshop together with researchers. So we have these disciplinary experts who are able to give best practice examples according to their own ways of working, exactly as Laurent did. And we had some instructors from the library who knew more theoretical knowledge about applying programming skills to the research. So that collaboration, I think, is really, really essential. I think we can move on to the next slides about rewarding all these efforts.
Yes, because of course, we are happy to do all these efforts, to do the teaching, to follow courses, to work more openly and reproducibly, but we need some rewards, right? And so I have a next set of question for you. What would motivate you towards being more open or practicing reproducible research or managing your data? Is it more citations to your paper, better chance to get hired, getting grants? Right. More funding, yes. More citations. More citations, of course, high impact, more credibility. More chances. I think that's I see here chances, more opportunities for the future, jobs, how to get your next job, how to get to the next stage. So here, citations seems to be the top reason that would lead researchers to better data management and more open and reproducible research. And I'm sure Florian has been instrumental in kind of pushing some of these incentives forward. Okay, so I suggest we move back to the presentation. And so I would like to offer some suggestions why working openly and reproducibly is a good thing and can be a career boost. And so you'll see two links there, a couple of links on these slides that go into more details. But there is research that suggests that open access articles get more citations, that open publications get more media coverage, that data that is openly associated, again, will get more citations, that open source software that is easy to access and reuse is more likely to be used. And of course, all this leads to more citations, which was one of the top ranking or the most cited reasons why you would be keen to work open and reproducibly. But of course, let's not forget that benefits, institutional benefits are of course also important. If working reproducibly, can help you navigate or kind of get more exposure in your institution is also a really important point. I think networking opportunities, and I think this talk is a really good example thereof, which I think is obvious by now, that Marta and I met through our interest in good data management and open and reproducible research, and that has kept on going for many, many years. And I had the opportunity to be invited to give talks through this enthusiasm for open and reproducible research. Another link, why open research? Well, I think working openly increases your visibility, builds a name for yourself, but it also allows you, it also empowers you to take, gives you the strength and confidence to take some control back that as researchers we often have lost, right, about our rights in terms of where to publish and why to publish, and make conscious decision not to publish in some venues, for example, because we don't agree with their general policies. Working openly and reproducible helps you to meet funders' requirement, and that kind of leads to a better chance to get grants and funding, which was also a point that was mentioned later on. And more, getting promotions or increasing your chance to get promotions in academia is also supported by these open and reproducible principles. But of course, do not forget the selfish reasons to work reproducibly that have been brilliantly exposed by Florian Markowitz at your symposium.
Thanks so much, Laurent, for this introduction, which I think grounds indeed like what are the values for researchers and what are the advantages of practicing open and reproducible research. I just wanted to say also, like we all, of course, that makes complete sense. We all put citations as the primary important value for us. And that's true because indeed most universities, most people who would employ you, look at your career, your CV, will still look at the number of papers that you have, how frequently they were cited, what's your age index, how many times you have published in Cell, Nature, Science, God knows, this kind of venues. But there are also changes in there, and there is, I think, a global recognition that there are problems with journal-based metrics. Like, for example, I was quite shocked when I was still a PhD student at Cambridge. I was sent to this seminar organized by some colleagues in France. I went to Paris, exciting. There was an editor of Nature who joined us in one of the workshops and said that actually, for Nature, sometimes it's very interesting to publish a controversial paper. What does controversial mean? That maybe not really reproducible or people will not be in agreement with the findings just because it boosts the citation index. So, people who agree or disagree, if there is a big discussion, that boosts citation of Nature as a venue, for example. It doesn't mean that all publications in Nature have high citation overall. That's the journal impact factor. So for this problem and many others, I will not be going into details. There are some questions that just the sheer number of papers that you have on your CV or just the citation of this paper is not really a good metric of your impact on the society, on research overall. Maybe if you spend your time increasing the reproducibility of your research practices within the community, it's something much more valuable to the society as a whole. So there are big discussions about how we should be doing research assessments. And I will not go into details into that because we are slowly running out of time, but I will give you just a couple of examples that that change is really coming, that we want to change that assessment system. If we can go on the next slide. This San Francisco DORA declaration, they are collecting resources, as you can see, case studies, advocacy resources, good practices, and initiatives taken by various stakeholders, universities, funders, who want to change the status quo and look at the research with a slightly broader picture, not just papers and citations, but actually what your contribution is. What if I'm working to cure cancer and I'm doing a lot of time spending consulting with the patients' communities, for example? Maybe then I produce less papers. Does it mean that my research is less valuable? If we can go to the next slide. I also wanted to show you, there was some comments about getting jobs, getting opportunities. That same DORA group just got some funding to develop a dashboard which will help institutions to track hiring and promotion criteria to make sure that we, again, don't look just at the impact factor. So there are really initiatives in there. And as Laurent has mentioned, I wanted also to showcase a couple of initiatives from the funders. If we can go to the next slide. Laurent just mentioned one of the funders from the UK is organizing an open research fund, which specifically addresses and invites researchers to apply for activities which can increase open science practices and reproducibility of those. And similar initiatives are also happening elsewhere. If we can go to the next slide very quickly. NVO, which is the Dutch national funder, have also organized such open science fund, inviting researchers to submit proposals which would increase reproducibility and openness of the research practices. And the next slide, again, funders are promoting change. So here is also a paper from the Dutch funding agency, how they wanted to change their CVs. Researchers are no longer allowed to submit their CVs and talk about impact factor and metrics of the papers, submit publications, but overall they have to write a narrative CV explaining how their research makes a difference. So I think these are these important steps for you as future researchers, future leaders in science to take into account when you're deciding how do you want to approach your research practices. If we can go to the next slide. I'm not sure what had happened there, but basically what we wanted to make sure to say is that it's all really in your hands. So if you care about reproducible practices, if you care about openness, you can also make a difference by being kind to people, by recognizing them, by supporting them. That already makes a difference in terms of recognition and rewards. And if we can go to the next slide.
Yes.
Laurent would like to, yeah.
Let's wrap up with community. And sorry about the slides. I'm not sure why they are so scrambled, but anyway, you have access to the slides and to the blog post. And so what you can't read here at the top says the following: open science. So what means open science? And initially when I got involved in open science, I thought that open science is, means widely disseminated and openly accessible. But actually open science means something else. And it took me some time to realize it. Open science is also inclusive and welcoming. And I think Cameron Neal here in this tweet cites it really well. If you remember at the very beginning, I told about different aspects of open science, right? Well, the only thing that links all these varying strands of open science and open research generally is inclusion and diversity as a first principle. And so the primary value proposition of open science is that diverse contributions allow better critique, refinement, and application. And I think that is an extremely important point that we should never forget.
What I wanted to give you as an inspiration as well is you can look around and see whether you already have any existing community of like-minded individuals. So I mentioned already that we have this community of data champions at Cambridge. We have a similar one in Delft. Perhaps you can join one. There is also a big international movement of open science communities. And if you can have a look at the next slide there, like within the Netherlands, there are multiple institutions who have started the open science communities, but they also started in other countries, like in Sweden, in Ireland, and in many more places. There is even a community starter kit, if we come to the next place, no, the next slide, which basically empowers researchers to find like-minded individuals who share your values, who want to do the same thing, who want to support you on this journey. And why that's important, if we can go to the next slide. Just yesterday, we had an event at Delft where we reflected together with researchers about the importance of communities, like in the scientific context. And what researchers have been commenting, the importance of those communities, including the open science communities, is that the feeling of inclusiveness, I belong, I'm appreciated, but also that feeling of being empowered by other people who have share the same values as you are. Sometimes you'll be up, sometimes you will help another person, sometimes you will need to be supported when something happened to you. So that's really important. And as I mentioned, and I think the best demonstration is that together with Laurent, after 11 years of knowing each other, we are still here doing the virtual seminar in Hong Kong. These are really long-lasting friendships. We keep in touch, we support each other in what we do, and I think that's something really invaluable. So I encourage you all, not to wait for the others, but get together, start communities, and maybe, through this seminar today, during the chat, during the discussion later on, you will encounter people who maybe think alike or share similar challenges. Reach out to each other. That can be all informal and bottom-up. That's entirely fine. I think that's it from us. We wanted to give acknowledge some people who have been helping ourselves in that story and in preparing this seminar, inspiring us with their ideas and contributions. However, as you can, I think something went a bit funny with our slides. Anyway, if you see the full version of our slides later on, I think you received the link, you will see lots of acknowledgement and credits that both Laurent and myself have, because again, we are here, the two of us today, but there has been lots of people in our lives, as researchers, as support staff in my case, who have been contributing to all that work that we are talking about today. I think this is it, Laurent, unless there is anything else that you would like to share from your side.
No, thank you very much.
Right. All right, so thanks, Laurent and Marta. I think that is quite inspiring to let us know actually how that entire movement has been moving along. And I hope that actually our students, after hearing all this, they will start thinking about how they join the community and get prepared for it, right? So I noticed that actually we have roughly about like a half an hour left. So I tried to engage our students to have a little bit more discussion. But while they are still thinking, I haven't really seen any specific question coming up. I just remind everybody that if you have any question, please write down in the chat and we'll try to address that and have our speakers responding to it. But may I start off just on two different levels to think about how this entire movement is going along. I think you mentioned quite a few times that it is relatively easy for a young investigator, and you look at our students, many of them actually they are finishing their PhD or master or so, moving into the research field. But as an individual, if, for example, their own lab, their own institution, they do not have such a policy or a well-rounded support, what is the motivation by itself? Is it sufficient for them to really get along, to initiate something in the lab? So maybe actually you can shed some light on that.
Laurent, would you like to get started?
Yeah. So I think personally on a very local level, it's possible to get things going quite easily if you have this intrinsic motivation. But I agree that if there is no support in the lab or in kind of in a department or university, it can very quickly become very, very difficult. And I certainly don't have any secret recipe here. However, I think there is one point that is very important, and I discussed it not too long ago with a prospective PhD student. When you kind of change lab, you want to start a PhD or you look for a lab for a master project and so on, you might know the professors because you have met them at conferences or they have taught you, or maybe you have read some papers. But I think as a prospective researcher that plans to move from one place to another, have a look at the lab's website. Are they open about their research practices, about their data management, their reproducible research? Check their papers, not only the title, the abstract and reading the paper, but do they share the data? Do they share their code? And try to make informed decisions about what's your strategy for your next step in your research. So even if locally, maybe you don't have the support that you need, think ahead. How do you see yourself as a researcher in the future, and base your decision on other things that maybe simply the papers that have been published.
Mm-hmm. All right, thanks. Maybe then I'll lead to a suggestion. Then, as Laurent and Marta pointed out, actually there's a community out there. So we may be able to leverage on the community out there to help to support some initiation of some effort so that they can start small and gradually grow it. I think that may be the direction to go also, right? But on the other hand, I would like to listen to Marta talk a bit about, for example, TU Delft. So you've been going through this multi-year efforts to grow the group, and even though with all this effort, you are not really in a comprehensive way to cover every single ground. How would you be able to get it through from individual or from a small group of individual to get the entire institution to buy into this movement?
That's a very good question, King. I really appreciate that. You're right. It takes a lot of time and effort, and by no means our journey at Delft is complete. We are, I would say, on the journey, and the goal is always a moving target. But I think what really matters to us is indeed that the fact that we listen to our researchers. So from support staff, but also encouraging you as researchers, if you feel like support is lacking, if you would like to do something, but maybe the support is not there or it's not right, just mention this to your university. And maybe just to give you an idea, that whole movement, that support for open science at TU Delft, I think started around 2014, 2015. There were series, I wasn't there yet, by the way, there were a series of consultations with researchers. What do you think about open and reproducible science practices? And everybody, you know, the reactions were, that sounds good, but I don't know how to do that. I don't have the time, so you have to help me. So with these consultations, we came back to our rector at that time and say, well, researchers are interested in openness, in reproducibility. And of course, from the rector's perspective, you know, they also have responsibility for reproducible research practices. Of course, we want to make sure that any research from TU Delft is reproducible. We don't have to have scandals, you know, at our end. So bringing those kind of arguments to the rectorates, that researchers see problems, but they don't have the capacity and the right skill to address that. Actually, our rector said, okay, then we must invest in providing some support. What do we do? You know, how do we provide that support? And then the discussion started again. Okay, you know, we can get this pilot initially. We got some funding to start off with the data stewards to see if this could make a difference. And indeed, that's something that really helped us to get started with providing some more disciplinary, more dedicated support to researchers. So I think indeed, to answer your question, King, I think that starting small, you know, doing pilots, small initiatives where you can have tangible benefits and feedback on that, is this moving in the right direction or in the wrong direction? That's really something worth capitalizing on and investing in. And secondly, that importance of researchers' voices, you know, and I think I gave you a couple of examples also of our researcher colleague, Anton Akhmerov, who actually, from his initiative, we had started with this policy on open research software. So you would be surprised how long the way researchers' voices can travel. So just don't be shy, you know, be courageous. I understand that requires some sort of courage and community, people like mine that can help you to have this, you know, even if initially I don't feel like supported. If you have 2-3 people, other PhD students who think alike, you might feel stronger. You might have the courage to say, I would like to have more support there and there. And that really helps. That makes a difference for university level support services.
All right. So I want to hear if there's any other questions. All right. So I see a question from Gabby talking about the Data Steward and the Digital Competence Center are both managed by your library.
Actually, no, the library is part of the contributions. There are some contributions from the library, but again, the project is very collaborative. So data stewards are managed by the faculty. So the faculty really take the ownership of their data steward. And why that was important is because if the line management of the data steward and let's say the responsibility for the staff member is within the faculty feels like they have to learn also about data management practices and embrace these challenges, help to provide guidance for this person. The library is appointing the coordinator of the data steward, but they are just coordinating the team. They are not the line manager of the data steward. So that's really a collaborative project across the faculty and the library. And the Digital Competence Center, the story is yet different in there. That's a collaborative project between several departments within TU Delft. So the library is involved, our ICT colleagues, people who provide infrastructure support for computing, and also high performance computer colleagues as well. So together, each one of us is contributing some staff members, our IT department, research software engineers, the library is contributing data managers, HPC people are contributing HPC experts, and together they constitute this virtual team, Digital Competence Center, which is then available to researchers as a service. So it's all collaboration. I think another example of the importance of collaboration.
Can I say that in that case, it's still the motivation of the practitioner, actually the researcher themselves should be the prime driving force, right?
I think so. You know, sometimes I think you need to have a goal setting and vision setting, you know, because otherwise, you know, if you just think about your current needs, maybe you will not see the benefits of open and reproducible research practices. So I think some advocacy is needed, but in terms of how do you provide that support, I completely agree with you that needs of researchers of the faculty are the key drivers.
All right. So while we're waiting for more questions to come in, may I continue along that line? In terms of policy, so we can say that the institution can have a policy, but how about funding agency? From the funding agency side, if they said that is having an open policy, it is a requirement for a university to get support, would that be even a stronger driver in the process? And how far have we gone in that? I noticed that you talk about actually there are fundings coming in, but I noticed that comparatively there's still pockets of activities rather than a general theme being taken up. So what's your thought about it?
I agree with you, King, and I think we are starting on this journey, but I think that funder requirements are really important in the end. They are giving you money to do research, and they care about how do you spend this money. And for example, there are discussions with the European Commission at the moment where our researchers at TELT get quite a lot of funding from. And one of the recommendations is that around 5% of the budget should go into proper management of software and research data. And the costs you can imagine in different ways. You know, you need to have some systems or tools to support version control or sharing of data and software, but you might also need to appoint a dedicated research software engineer or a data manager in your research group to be able to help you to address those practices more effectively. So I agree with you, King, and I think more has to be done. Definitely, these policies have to be clearer. We have to advocate for this, and funders have really important role to play. Things are changing, they are getting better. For now, I think there is experimentation in that field. But I was wondering, Laurent, perhaps you have something important to say from your perspective as researcher working at institution.
I agree with you. If funders were to mandate rules that promote open and reproducible research, from one day to another, all researchers would implement these. Otherwise, they wouldn't get any funding.
Right.
But what is difficult is that very often those that make these decisions, that are part of these committees in the funders, are the more senior people that are maybe not as attracted, or they see that they have a lot to lose, as opposed to very young researchers that have a lot to win. So I think there is also a conflict of interest here as part of the funders. And I think the Wellcome Trust, that is maybe a little bit more independent, has been leading the way, and very often other funders, maybe funded with public funds, they I think come a little bit later and impose policies, but that are not as well integrated with the actual needs as Marta talked about the policies. It sometimes becomes a box ticking exercise. Oh, my papers need to be open access. But that's somehow not the most important thing, right? We want to implement these best practices as early as possible.
Mm-hmm. I just wonder whether there has been any comparisons for example, we talk about what's the beauty of having this open access and all this open research. Citation is one of the topic actually we talk about. Has there been any study to really evaluate, to see a clear-cut difference in terms of the outcome, so that we can highlight that and use it as a carrot in a way to really lure more individuals or institutions to join in?
So in the slides, I point to some papers, and there surely are more recent ones that indicate that open access papers get more citations, open source software gets more used. But I think it would be really good to try to have a more systematic kind of comparative analysis. But it is very difficult because there are lots of confounding factors. You can't do the same study, work openly and closely, with good data management and bad data management. So, but yes, I think it's very difficult to move on from personal experiences and some papers that suggest one or the other to more systematic evaluation.
Okay. Marta has something to add?
I also wanted to add indeed that there is a lot of work currently undertaken by DORA, San Francisco DORA, this declaration that I mentioned beforehand on how we should be trying to avoid, using just journal impact factors and what kind of alternative metrics there are. So they got some funding to be able to conduct this research more comprehensively. And there are also interesting effort. There is now a Research on Research Institute. I think that's the name. I can look it up later. In the UK, which also studies this on more of a meta-analysis. So indeed, impact of policies and trying to understand those associations more quantitatively. What I also wanted to say, during that policy development, we have spoken with a lot of researchers. So again, that's qualitative, that's not quantitative evidence, but some of them mentioned that because they have been working on their software openly on tools like GitHub, like GitLab, when they were then applying for jobs at different companies, even outside of academia, people were, they got benefits because the future employer was able to look at their code and understand exactly their contributions and how reproducibly they work with their research. And then such a candidate has got much higher chances to get hired. And that's what we have been hearing from our researchers graduating from TU Delft. So I think, of course, if you work in academia, you care about the papers, about your visibility, impact, about funding. But I guess some of you might want to consider a career outside of academia, and that can be advantageous to you as well. So just to mention these kind of qualitative examples as well.
Right. I think that's what we were referring to about impact. Impact sometimes is not measured on a paper. Impact, you can have like one paper, but then for whatever your contribution, people will recognize. And the right people will recognize it. If the wrong people, they don't recognize it, maybe actually it's their loss. It's not necessarily your loss. Let me go back to some of the questions in the chat box. I think that Jennifer has a question to Marta. He's talking about the Data Steward. It's the official name of the position. The title seems very specific as compared to the generic title as like a research data specialist. Is it a TU Delft strategy to build a team of data stewards highlighting their specialty?
Indeed, that was our idea to start with. You are very right, Jennifer. That's a very good question. Who is a data steward? And I have to say at the beginning, I don't even remember how this term had started, who used that first, but somehow in the Netherlands, everybody was talking about data stewards, and that's the term that we use. Indeed, a stewardship is more like looking after, so that's opposed to being the specialist that perhaps people are afraid of approaching. It doesn't really matter. This is semantics, and I guess how you choose the name of a person. Indeed, this is the term that we are using more and more frequently, and I'm happy to say that this year there was actually a working group on a national level that I was lucky to be part of. Data steward is now an official job profile. So it wasn't before. The people were called data stewards, but in fact, like in the job classification system, we have this, not sure if it's interest to everybody. They were called scientific information specialists, but as of summer this year, we actually have a proper job title called data steward. So it is indeed becoming the thing. We would like to have subject-specific specialists with that expertise on research data management. And subsequently, now we are also working on recognizing the profile of a research software engineer, which is still not the case, at least in the Netherlands. But change is coming, hopefully.
All right. Okay, I want to bring it closer to home for our students to think about. So again, a question I think both Laurent and Marta would be able to address. I know Marta was doing like a genetics and developmental biology type of like work in the past, and Laurent was doing the computational biology work. Think about that. If you start off your research career with this kind of open research idea at the beginning, how would you do your research differently? How will you design your experiments? How will you design your entire study? So that would be something actually our students should start thinking about, because actually otherwise they would be simply following whatever others have been practicing in the field.
My general advice to that is make sure you know the tools that you use, right? So this could be an experiment, it could be tools in the lab, but it could also be a software that you use, kind of any tool, any technique that you become familiar with. Don't be scared to become an expert, right? What will distinguish an average researcher from a good researcher is their level of expertise, and do they master what they do? And that will kind of push you to the limits. Do you understand what you do? And I think it's once you start, and of course, we can't be expert in everything, right? But especially in the beginning of your career, make sure you understand really what you do. And that will then lead you to being critic about what the data that you produce, the analysis that you produce. And I think that's a really good way into, once you understand how things work and you can start to be critic about the data that you produce, that will then lead you into saying, okay, I need to understand, so I'm going to trace everything I do. And then once you get there, you will then realize that you need the right tools to be able to trace, to store what you do, to document what you do. And that will lead you into the kind of technical aspects of open and reproducible research. I don't think we should learn tools just for the sake of learning them, but get this intrinsic motivation. And in my experience, the best way to get this intrinsic motivation is wanting to understand.
Mm-hmm. Marta, you have anything to add?
Yes, if I can actually, if I may add to you my personal story. So I was working in a lab where we worked with samples. So I did some, in my work, we did some bioinformatic analysis, but also a lot of, experimental, wet lab experiments. What that meant, for me as a PhD student, we had a massive -80 freezer where all these samples were stored, And what I found extremely frustrating, whenever I was approaching this -80 freezer, I was wearing all these, tough gloves not to freeze my hands, but I was also worried about the samples because that -80 freezer was a constant mess. So you open the doors, if you're lucky that everything doesn't fall on you, you have no idea what's in these boxes. There was like rows and rows of boxes with no labeling system. Good luck, find your right samples. Hope that nobody moved your boxes around. So it was a complete mess and nobody cared. I was coming to the lab and telling people, it can't be like that. It's just not sustainable. Let's change it. Nobody cared. So in the end, as a PhD student, with the tools that I had available at that time, I've created like a shared Excel spreadsheet where we had let's say, an equivalent of that freezer, and shared it with the lab members to know exactly what we have in each box. And people started using it. People started to love it because they knew exactly what they have and wasted less time, going to this -80 freezer and facing this big, big challenge. So it can be little things like that. Of course, now if I knew what I know, I would have approached my colleagues from the library and asked them for help, for example, how to start using a proper electronic lab notebooks where I could have that sample tracking system together with better versioning of my data and of all my notes. I wouldn't have to be carrying back, at the end of my PhD, I had 14 lab notebooks, and there's no search button. Nobody can search my note, so how on earth my colleagues would know how to repeat my experiments? So I would definitely want to do it better. And I would certainly ask for help of the library, but I would also, if I did my PhD again, I would have reached out to people like Laurent, a data champion, from a similar discipline, to ask, how can I do better? How can I start with version control? So look for peers, and look for professional support from your library colleagues, for example.
Right. I can also share that as one of my stories, that actually I've been searching through the notebook of my students quite a bit. Particularly when there's a new student who come in who want to continue another project as an extension, then you need to go through the entire stack of all the notebooks, and you find that you're missing pieces here and there, and then you need to find out what exactly they are. And actually it's pain, right? Laurent, you have something to add?
Yes, so Gabby explained on the chat that often the maybe early career researchers are keen for that, and more experienced researchers don't really see the benefit. And I agree with you. And that's why community is important. I had this feeling many, many times years ago where I felt like I was a bit on my own, alone, and felt demotivated by the lack of response by more senior academics. And my suggestion, or what I want to do now, is to give the voice to early career researchers, right? Because they have a different struggle, and they get their hands dirty. They know how things work in the lab, not the senior researchers. And so I think it's important to give a voice to early career researchers.
And you build a community so that one day you become the senior researcher and you can change it. All right. So I wonder whether there will be other questions coming from floor. Right, the students, don't feel shy. No question. All right, okay. So I will throw my last question before we bring it to the end. I noticed that actually when we were talking about all the data, importantly, a lot of it, for example, including all the coding and the record and all this. But the question is that, particularly when you're doing biological research, sometimes the definition of an experiment is not until you finish the experiment, until you start analyzing data, you don't know actually what are the criteria you need to capture. And so with that, so I want to bring it back to the so-called design of the experiment from the very beginning. So does having this kind of like a proper collection of data also, component or open research, would it play a role that how we really, when we design experiments, how to shape it, how to even change it early on to have a more thorough analysis before we start an experiment or a project?
Laurent, I was wondering, maybe that would be worth to talk about the registered reports initiative. What do you reckon?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, that's a really good way to officially think about your experiment for before implementing it. Do you want to say a little bit about it?
I was just thinking, there is this initiative of registered reports where researchers can indeed submit their designs of an experiment for peer review. So that's a way, you know, for you to solicit feedback from other experts within the community about your design, like, you know, do the peer review before getting the data and the paper. And there is a collaboration of these people behind registered reports with some journals. And basically, if your plan for experiments is accepted, peer-reviewed, people are happy with your plans, then you have a guarantee that your research outputs, your publication will be accepted for a publication regardless whether, let's say, your hypothesis turns out to be positive or negative. That doesn't solve your question about whether the methodology and design are right, but I think that's quite interesting concept of trying to get feedback from your peers at the stage where you're designing your experiments, you know, like in the end, collectively, we are smarter. So that's just one thing I wanted to bring up, but probably Laurent has got some more relevant things to add.
Yeah, your question reminded me of the quote, I think it's by Fisher, consulting a statistician after collecting your data the statistician might tell you what your data died from. And so we somehow come back to the basics. You know, it's important to think about and think about the experiment, design the experiments about the very beginning. And the best way to do that is to get different people together with different expertise, a statistician, the bioinformatician, the data steward, obviously the field expert that is thinking about the experiment. And this doesn't need, you know, complicated infrastructure. You don't need, you know, to know technical tools. You don't need to use GitHub or whatever. You know, it's just bringing the basic notions together to address this. And I think it's fine to try out and fail. We will not get this right at the beginning. It's by iterating, trying, and slowly accumulating you know, experience, learning new tools, implementing the tools, gathering data. That's how we slowly, you know, we'll be better at designing our next experiment and running at the next experiment, and then we will better at reproducing our future experiments and not the past experiment, because then it's too late. So let's try as early as possible to implement this best practice and then improve over time.
Right. Okay, so thanks, Roy, for the last word. I think certainly bring it back to what all our students here are doing the research. I think that out of it, the very motivation at the very beginning is because of the curiosity. We want to explore something, we want to understand it. And so therefore, I think this try and error approach has been always there. We need to rely on that in order to explore new frontiers. Otherwise, actually, we're simply repeating somebody else's experiments. But when it fails, we need to clearly know actually what went wrong. And if you don't have a clear documentation and all the data management component in it, so you won't know what went wrong, and you simply like repeating the mistakes again and again. And in fact, you even let other people to repeat the same mistakes because you don't document it. So it's in a way, it's like mismanagement of resources as a whole. So with that, I would like to thank again Laurent and Marta for joining us today, for spending the last an hour and a half sharing your view as well as your experience that on this particular front. And I hope that our student would have learned quite a bit out of it. And I hope that they are now motivated to go back to a lab and start the movement in their own lab. I hope that they are not being clamped down by their supervisors. And at the same time, I want to highlight that actually Gabby and Jennifer and the group, Kevin, they were all here. They're trying to help. And so you know that if you really want to do it, we have the support behind. And if their experience, we want to learn more, I'm pretty sure Marta and Laurent, they will be happy to continue to engage us, to offer their insight as well as experience. Okay, all right, so with that, we've done today's section, and I hope that you enjoy it. So on a day that we have the typhoon hitting Hong Kong, everybody's staying home. So actually, I don't mind overrun a little bit because I know that you don't have tasks afterwards. So with that, so enjoy the evening, and for Marta and Laurent, enjoy the rest of the day.
Thank you all. Thank you so much.
All right. Okay. Okay.
Thank
good.
you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Yeah, thank you. Just one more housekeeping item. We will send you a feedback form later tomorrow, just to invite you for feedback. So that's
right.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Marta.
Okay,
have a good day. Have a good day. King has a good
Thank you.
evening.
Thank you so much.
Right, thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Laurent. Thank you, Marta. Thank you, Professor Charles.
Thanks.